around the world 10 years ago. What do you do to follow up? Well, maybe you go again. We're going to find out what's up with Matt Guthmiller on this episode of In the Hangar. Hello and welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Dan Milliken.
And I'm Bailey Ward.
Bailey, we are at the Flying Eyes booth. They have graciously helped sponsor us. If you go to flyingeyesoptics.com and use the discount code, taking off all caps one word, you get 10% off.
Yep.
Also, Clemens Insurance makes this possible. ClemensInsurance.net. Matt Guthmiller, we finally get to catch up with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. All right, well, I know you get asked, let's get it out of the way right now. 10 years ago, around the world, it kind of started your deal. You were 19.
Yeah, so when I was 18, I read about a guy from California who was 20, who was going to go set this record as the youngest person to fly solo around the world. And I'd been flying for a few years. I just thought, well, that seems cool.
Right.
I could do that. If he can do it, I could do it.
Absolutely.
And so I spent a year figuring out how to go do it, flew a Bonanza around the world, and kind of shared the adventure with people along the way, and then decided to start a YouTube channel afterwards, and I guess how we ended up here.
I'm very curious because you're OG as far as the aviation YouTubers. What was it like back then? Was it just a Hero 2 and you could leave it up for 90 minutes with no editing? What was it like?
I think I started with like the Hero 3.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And it was just, it was still a lot of work then, maybe in some ways even more so. But yeah, just throw a bunch of cameras up and go do it. I mean, to be fair, there were like Steve-O and Flight Chops have been doing it before I had, and I kind of came across their channels one time and was like, again, this seems cool. I could do that. Right. I kind of like filmmaking. Like maybe I'll finally do something with that. And just decided to start sharing some adventures, and really wanted to show people the kinds of things you can do with GA airplanes. Not just go fly around the pattern or fly to the same airports, but like go find somewhere that you can't really get to out in the backcountry any other way, or some little airport that's really unique and interesting that you'd never really think about, and stuff like that.
That's incredible, especially for me, someone who is 19. I'm not sure that I can say, I can definitely go do that right now, but
take your 182 across the world. You ready, Bailey?
Sure, yeah.
Well, yeah, one of my biggest problems at the time was I didn't have an airplane or anything. I was just renting flight school airplanes, and they weren't going to go, let me take a 210 and fly it around the world for a couple months. So I had to find somebody that was basically crazy enough to lease me an airplane, as like a 19-year-old with 500 hours and fly it around the world. And I finally found a guy in San Diego who had a Bonanza that he was willing to lease me, and
wow,
that's how I found it.
Absolutely incredible. Okay, so a little outside of GA, let's talk about you and the L39.
Okay.
So give us a breakdown on that. I know you've been racing.
How you got into it.
You got into it.
Right. So basically, a buddy of mine and I were getting an oil change done on my Bonanza. We're like at this shop, and they were doing an annual on a MiG-15. And we ended up talking to them about it, and they're like, yeah, actually the guy's trying to sell this MiG-15 and this MiG-17. And it sounded like a really good deal. We're like, we got to go buy these MiGs. They're like $80,000 each or something.
Right.
It's like, this seems too good to be true. Turns out it maybe was. But that weekend, or like a day or two later, he's like, my buddy's like, you want to come down to Santa Fe? We're going to go fly an L-39 and a MiG-15. I was like, I mean, if I have to, And
right, as we all would.
Right, so we go down there, we spend an hour each flying the L-39, and then fly the MiG-15. And I loved the MiG-15. It was like, you get into this thing, and it's like you're strapping into this 1940s jet. Like, you feel like Chuck Yeager or something, right? And I'm like, I love the MiG, we got to get the MiGs. He was like, I don't know about the MiGs, I'm going to buy an L-39. And I was like, well, where are you going to put it? He lives 3 hangars down from me. We both live on this air park in Wyoming. And he goes, well, I was thinking maybe in your hangar. I was like, so, then I won't have room for my L-39, so I just get to fly yours? And he was like, yeah, I guess. And so we did that. We kind of ended up sharing this L-39 for about a year, and then he got tired of sharing, so he bought a second one. So now there's 2 L-39s. I didn't have to buy either of them, and I get to go fly them. It's a great deal.
Okay, you can't beat that.
Yeah.
How did you get into racing?
That was something I'd always kind of been interested in. I think Reno is sort of this thing that's, I think to a lot of people, kind of like this mythical, like they've heard of it, and a lot of pilots don't even like really know what it is or hadn't been to it and things like that. And I just thought that was sort of interesting about it. And there's so much history there. All these guys in sort of, like this sort of maybe golden age of general aviation and like military aviation and stuff in like the 50s and 60s. all those guys were into air racing. And I just thought that seemed really cool. I thought it seemed, just awesome to go fly 50 feet off the ground at 500 miles an hour. Like, it just sounds cool.
Right.
And then it turns out you get in the airplane and go do it, and it is by far the coolest thing I've ever done.
Really?
And so I just, last year being that, like, Reno was, the final year of Reno, I was like, I've got to do this. And so I just kind of really ended I moved heaven and earth to, like, make it happen that year. And then shot a documentary about it too. That'll be coming out later. But like, we got all these cool IMAX cameras and stuff, and like,
Wow. Oh,
I mean,
that's
in the
so
cockpit, like,
exciting.
I'll brag just a little bit. I watched the Blue Angels movie recently.
Right, yeah. Great
Got
movie.
nothing on you?
I saw some of the. I mean, they're way
They're
cooler.
okay,
They're way
but,
cooler.
yeah.
I will give them that. But like, I saw a couple of these cockpit shots, and I'm just like, we have so much, like, such better footage, like better cameras. Like, this is gonna be great.
Oh, I
So,
like it.
But yeah, so I mean, we did that, and yeah, it's incredible. It's the adrenaline rush, like the physicality of it. You're like in this almost 90-degree bank, pulling like 5 Gs for 10 minutes, going 500 miles an hour. Like, you like literally like 3 football fields every second, trying to figure out like where to go next, how to not hit the guy next to you, how to get around him, all these things. I mean, it was the most intense, most incredible thing I've ever done.
That's awesome. So what was your experience like from transitioning to something like a Bonanza to the L-39?
It's not that bad, and I'd flown like a handful of other turbine airplanes and things,
Right.
but it's honestly like the easiest jet in the world to fly. The systems are super simple. You just kind of strap in, you're like wearing this jet, and you just go, and it's like flying a really heavy 172 or something. The only thing that'll really bite you is the engine has about a 12-second spool up from idle to full power. So if you get behind the power, get low and slow, or you got to go around, like, you're sitting there just waiting, being like, I hope eventually this thing comes to life and we clear the trees that we're headed towards at 150 miles an hour.
Right.
So that's like the thing you got to watch out for. But other than that, it's not the highest performing jet by any means. Like, you're cruising at like 340, stuff like that, and burning a tremendous amount of gas to do it.
Right.
But
I've heard it drinks it.
you can push the nose over and go 490 indicated, which is kind of the fun part.
Wow.
Wow.
So you raced at the final races at Reno. They've announced the Roswell. Are you planning on? Is that? How do you feel about all that?
I think like everybody, I'm a little disappointed that Reno has ended, and I would love to race again. I'll put it that way. I hope that everything goes off without a hitch next year, and they get that all put together, and we go race. Like, I think that would be fantastic.
All right. I want to go back a little bit. The first time I actually saw, I wasn't a big YouTuber, okay, or watching YouTube.
I'm not either.
I would log in to see how to fix something. Okay, that was the extent of my YouTube until I started the aviation. So then I started watching stuff, and having a 210, the very first thing I saw of you ever was when you were guest on the guys that were doing the 210 around the world, and you did that leg, the northern leg.
Yeah.
What was it like? Did you go that same route in the Bonanza?
I had done a little bit different route in the Bonanza.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So what was it like having to wear that suit and having to fly like that those hours? Was it, and being in a single engine piston over the North Atlantic?
Well, that part's the same, just the scenery is a little different.
Right.
But, you go up to like Greenland and Iceland, and like Greenland in particular is just this really cool place that nobody really goes to because it's so hard to get there.
Right.
And you're there basically like on a road trip that you like just cross the ocean, and now you're surrounded by like all these gigantic icebergs and glaciers that are like 12,000 feet tall. I mean,
Wow.
it's crazy.
Incredible.
I think it's like one of the coolest places on the planet. So to get to be there is just always super cool. And I've been there 3 times now, and that blows my mind. Like, I did it in the 210, did it in DC-3 a few years ago, and then just did it a month ago in TBM.
Wow.
Oh, what's all this about the TBM now?
Yeah, I was about to say, so speaking of that, I've seen a lot more on your Instagram account.
So I have a TBM to fly. I'll put it that way.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
And,
jealous.
I'm flying it around the world right now. We're making a TV show about it, and it'll be out the end of next year.
All right,
Oh
so
my
now
gosh.
you're doing, let's go to now what we teased at the beginning. 10 years ago, you were 19, you set the record for the youngest at the time. Now you're doing it again, why?
Because someone paid me.
Okay.
No, I mean, it's fun. It's a lot of work, though.
It is,
like,
yeah.
I love the adventure of exploring all these interesting places and things like that. but flying in other countries, and particularly flying like a small, relatively small GA airplane, it's just so different, and everything is such a pain in the butt. I go fly, and I'm just like, I just wish I was home, because it's so much easier to just go do everything here. You don't go through security and like take everything out of all of your bags like 5 times or something, and wait an hour to get fuel, and then wait another hour for somebody to show up to stand there while you start the engine, and like things like that. And so it's just it's a lot of work. It's a lot of fun. It's a very cool adventure. I'm really glad that I get to do it, but I don't know that I would just
Get up
do
and
it
go
and
do it again.
go do it. Yeah.
So then what has your experience been as far as comparison between flying it in the Bonanza and now in the TBM?
It's much easier in the TBM.
To say the least.
And a little faster, probably.
It's a little faster. I mean, there's a lot less to worry. You go across the North Atlantic, and in the Bonanza, you're like icing, like ceilings, like icing with seal, like all of these different things. And in the TBM, you're just like, it looks like we can get in with the approach there. Like, worry about icing later. Like, it's just, it makes you point the nose where you want to go, and you go there, and it just makes that easier. I will say the one thing is, right now, not being able to stop in Russia, from the plan is to go from Japan to Alaska, and basically if the weather is absolutely perfect on a day where we can get customs at the nearest airport in Japan, and literally the weather's perfect the whole way, and we get like a 30 or 40 knot tailwind, then that's really easy.
Right.
If all of those, if like all the stars do not align like that, then there's like a more expensive option that is try to tank a TBM, which is much more difficult than tanking a Bonanza. That's one nice thing about a Bonanza is,
you can.
People put fuel tanks in those airplanes all the time to ferry them different places and whatnot. You throw a tank in, it's not pressurized. You have like a DAR sign off, you're done. And it's much more complicated in something like a TBM. So that option becomes, just that much higher of a bar, and then if none of that kind of becomes feasible, we just fly westbound and don't actually make it all the way around the world. So it's some ways it's a lot easier, but like when it comes down to it, it's sort of kind of simpler to do it in the Bonanza.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned it's a lot of work. Do you have like somebody or a team or a company that handles the logistics of all the paperwork and red tape that has to go?
Yeah, so it's a mix of things. I mean, sometimes I just email an FBO and kind of have them take care. It depends on the country and depends on like the permits that you need to get to that country. So sometimes it's like I email the FBO and they kind of take care of all the airport permissions. Sometimes it's using some other third-party trip support to arrange all that stuff. So I just launched this new flight planning app, 8Flight, that kind of does a whole bunch of things to make flight planning simpler. But one of the things we're looking at kind of getting into is simplifying some of that international stuff, more so like going US to Canada and stuff. But as a result, like I'm using this flight to dabble in that a little bit. So I've got like some systems and some people like doing some of that for it. So it's this broad mix of like different ways to get to all of these countries. But again, that's one of the things is like a lot of times you need an overflight permit, a landing permit, some airport parking slot, and sometimes, that just becomes really, I mean, obviously that's just really complicated on, the face of it, but sometimes you get into the weeds. And like the other day I was in Romania and we were flying at this like smaller airport, and then I was going to go back to the main airport to get fuel and like be there for the night before I flew back to France. They're like, this is like noon, and they're like, oh, we don't have a parking spot for you now until 6 p.m. So I'm like, okay, so I just sit here like literally 15 miles away for 6 hours until I can, park at this other airport, which I'm like, they had lots of parking when I left a couple hours ago. But,
So you mentioned your new app. Tell us a little bit more about that. I know your experience here at Osh has been a little bit different because of that.
Yeah, I mean, usually, the last couple of years have been incredible because I've had these L-39s here to fly and like go fly in the show and go fly formation stuff with a bunch of other jets. And I kind of went from like, just walking around enjoying the show, talking to people, to like flying airplanes the whole show, which is infinitely better anyway.
Right.
But now this year, like we've got a booth for 8Flight, and I'm just at the booth all day. This is like the first time I've seen the sun yet today. I've just been there.
And it's cloudy.
And which is, it's been great because it's been busy. Like people love the app. They're coming up and talking and things. But definitely a little bit of a different Oshkosh experience. But Yeah, so decided to build this app basically to take, like, you know, I was tired of like switching between like 4 or 5 different apps to go like check the weather, check some fuel prices,
Yeah.
call somebody, find out the fuel price is wrong, now check the weather again,
Yeah.
come back here, and then do that like a couple times because that was like 3 days out and now I want to do it the next day or something. I wanted to put all that in one place so that you can just like use this little timeline at the bottom and see what is the weather going to be like, what FBOs are open. We go out and get all of the fuel prices so that they're always up to date. We don't wait
wow.
for somebody to go update them, things like that. We got airport restaurants, you know where to stop. Just all of these things all in one place so that you can spend like 5 seconds flight planning instead of 5
Oh,
or
I
10
love
minutes
that.
5
That's awesome.
times.
Okay, you've got 8Flight, you've got your YouTube channel, you've got an L39, you've got the TBM flight around the world. What is your primary day job?
All of those things. It's been a very busy year. Yeah, it's been, I mean, so let's see, I do the YouTube stuff and kind of all the other media things that go with that, like this TV show, and the flying with that, flying for fun. I started an internet provider a few years ago that kind of does its thing, and then now this 8Flight app, and really 8Flight's been my main focus for the last 9 or 10 months at least, you know, where I work on that like 12 or 14 hours a day, and then somewhere in there like squeeze in some flying and, you know, go around the world and stuff like that.
Yeah, no big, you just squeeze it in. So I also saw on your Instagram account Honda Jet. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I have a buddy with a Honda Jet that I've flown a few times, and so I've flown that. I don't know. I guess I've maybe been like really lucky to just meet all these people with cool airplanes, and that's like my favorite part, really. About living on this air park in Wyoming is like there's all kinds of really interesting people with really cool airplanes, and they just want to go fly and they want to like show you their airplanes and stuff, and so there's always like somebody to go fly like jet formation stuff with, or, you know, go fly in some interesting airplane, you know, Honda Jet, Learjet, MU2, whatever it is, Husky, a helicopter, some other helicopter. Like, it's just, there's like such a wide mix. It's super fun. Just to, like, go walk around the neighborhood and hop in and go for a ride and get to fly something new.
So I'm hearing I need to move to an air park.
I think that's the move. It's the best thing I've ever done.
All right, well, Matt, thank you so much for coming, sharing about not only the past, but the present, what's going on with you. I appreciate it. We wish you all the best on the TBM around the world.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you guys for watching. These programs are made possible by our sponsors, like we mentioned at the beginning. Also, 67 Design, 67D.com, best tablet and cell phone mounts for your plane or even your boat or car. Marshall Protective Services, mpsprotects.com. Z-Vision, the brightest landing and taxi lights out there. And Colton Mortgage, coltontakingoff.com. We really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.
In the hangar.